Good morning, afternoon, or good evening. Anytime you're watching this podcast, this is the SCP or Society of Consulting Psychology podcast. I'm your host for this session, Dr. Daniel Lattimore, coming to you from Cincinnati. And here we have a very strong treat for you. We have Joanie Connell, Dr. Joanie Connell, on talking about her book. I have it right here. It is Consulting to Technical Leaders, Teams, and Organizations, Building Leadership in STEM Environments. So thank you. I was hoping our sound people would have the round of applause, but I'm going to give it to you here. How are you?
Hey, it's great to see you, Daniel, and to be a part of this podcast, be on the interviewee end this time. I've been hosting some of them with the other authors of the book series, and I'm so grateful to you for interviewing me. This is a lot of fun to work with you.
Likewise. So, for those who are maybe somewhat familiar with Joni and myself, we co facilitated the 2022 SCP conference. It was virtual and we had a great time doing it. And what a great time to be able to talk about your role in STEM and being enrolling and working with technical leaders. And as people who are familiar with this podcast have stated, Joni has been in the host chair, and sometimes we're really good about giving others flowers, but in this case, we like to give Joni her flowers.
Oh, God.
So this is for you.
You're outshining me as a host there, Daniel.
No, we're building upon the great work that you have done. So, if it's okay with you and people who are familiar with the format, I'd love to ask you some questions about your book.
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome, awesome. So, Dr. Connell, Joni, what inspired you to write this book?
It might have been more of a who than a what, but it started with Rodney Lohman, the series editor. And he's a very inspirational person, actually, in terms of how much he's written. And he has a way of inspiring others to write. And he's actually gotten an award for that, too. Um, yeah, at SCP. But I wanted to sort of highlight how he brought it out in me to be inspired myself to write this book. So, I mean, he was even suggesting to me at one point that, I have a lot of experience working with technical people and I have the engineering background. My first career was electrical engineering. I worked in Silicon Valley for 8 years as an engineer. And I found at the time that there was just so much dysfunction in the workplace. I mean, that continues to today, but in a lot of different environments. But as an engineer, we were never taught how to deal with people side of things. We were only taught how to deal, with circuits and software. So I became much more interested in people and trying to figure out how they worked. And that's what got me into consulting. And I've been doing that ever since. And consulting largely to technical people. And Rodney said, but it's more than just you and your experience. There's literature out there. There's which is necessary to cite for an academic publisher such as the APA. And we'll get into that later probably, but um, he said there you have so much experience and knowledge and of the fields, and this is valuable to others. I think that was the other part that he said. It was valuable because so much work now is working with technical people and teams, and it's whether you're in a completely different industry. You could be working in fashion, but you still have the IT department. You still have the website that needs to be supported for displaying the merchandise, things like that, or creating it. I mean, there's just so much technology, and so he was saying it's such a big field. So um, that's what inspired me, I guess you would say. It was more Rodney, and then understanding that I did have something to offer, and I think lastly, I'll just say that there was a humility piece too. Like, wait, why me? I don't. It's not just me. And he said, no, but there is a lot out there that supports what you do and what you can say, and that's how I came to actually say yes, I can, because I can. I decided to create an interview study for the book, and interview technical people, technical leaders, and I also did enormous amount of review of the literature just to make sure I was up to date and figure out what was there to support what I did, I could write.
Well said. Thank you, Joni. And something you said that stood out was the dysfunction piece. Like whether you're working with, I don't know if you meant to do that pun, but it works with electrical engineering, I imagine, and then also with people and communication. You're finding the fault lines. Um,
Mhm.
but engineering into psychology, that's not a jump you hear every day. That is not a transition you hear every day. So, what I know we just talked about, the inspiration behind the book, and Dr. Lohman, that's a name that if you type in anything consulting psychology, you're going to see his name attached to it. But what could you say more about what that book is about and how you delve into it? How do you map out that engineering and
Mm.
psychology pairing?
Oh, yeah, well, that's a great question. Well, first of all, I just have to have that qualifier that, engineers and technical people aren't fundamentally different from other people, right? I mean, we're all humans. But there are certain characteristics that attract people to certain industries, and there are certain contextual factors of the industries that reward certain types of behaviors, and so we end up in a culture that supports a certain way of being, as you might describe it that way. And I wrote the book about STEM: science, technology, engineering, and math, right? And that those tend to be very similar in the cultures in some ways. There are specifics to each particular one, but so to answer your question, sort of going back here, as an engineer, I can say that personally I can identify with this, but also just understanding how engineers and scientists tend to work, in a very rational place, a logical way of looking at the world. Science is rational and logical, and there are right answers, right? Either it works or it doesn't work, right? I mean, whether it's a circuit or whether it's chemistry to create a medical treatment for a disease. If it doesn't work, it's black and white. And so people start to think that way in other ways too, and that would be like their highest value. And so you might even say for an engineer, another value is efficiency, right? And so they're looking at things, um, for the most part, again, and overgeneralizing a little bit here, but rewarded for looking at things in that way, to solve problems in a rational, logical way, and perhaps in this way devaluing some of the human side of things, right? And applying this type of approach to human problems. So when we have somebody at work on a team who is acting in a way that is not necessarily productive, an engineer might say, well, the data shows they should be doing this, and if they're not doing it that way, then they're wrong and they should be fired, as opposed to saying, um, well, let's look at what how they're feeling and why they might be behaving this way. And we start bringing emotions, right, which is words that might be a little bit different for that field. They aren't used to that, or and then they might say, but that's a waste of my time, that's not the important part, this is what we need to be efficient here. And that kind of reaction, some people who are watching, or maybe even you, Dan, might be saying, like, well, how would somebody come to that conclusion? It's actually very real in these types of environments, because that's the way people have been raised in the industries to look at problems and solve them. And so that those things like that are things that the book touches on, in terms of understanding the mindset, right? I think that's one of the biggest pieces of the book, is understanding the mindset of the technical leaders, and then also hearing in their words. As I said, that I interviewed a whole bunch of technical leaders and people who work with technical leaders to do a qualitative study to get quotes from them on how they perceive challenges and what's going on in their workplace. And so this is for the consultant to really see things through their eyes and have this empathy and understand what they're going through. And then there's, what the book is about is more applied ways of handling that as consultants, using consulting models and literature and consulting to deal with that.
Thank you for that breakdown. You had mentioned how the cultures in which we implement ourselves or that we might live within really shape our attitudes toward the work that we do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was thinking about, specifically in STEM, we know that there might be barriers in those messages to what this is and what this isn't. When we think of STEM, there are a lot of E words that come to mind. You mentioned electrical engineering. I think of efficacy. I think of effectiveness. I think of um, those, but words that we don't come across as much of are emotions or,
Right.
um,
Mm-hmm.
so how would you say we continue to bridge that gap between, the
Mm-hmm.
traditional narratives of what this isn't and, making space for what it could be?
Wow, I love that. Making space for what it could be. Yeah. I tell you, some of the book is about approaches to connecting with technical people. And, in terms of consulting, it's not just how to do like a coaching or an intervention, but it's also how to get clients, right? And so part of that is being heard by them and attracting their attention, right? Whether they're thinking about hiring you, or whether somebody else in the organization has hired them and you're stepping into a room with them and they're just like, this is a complete waste of my time. I'm not going to participate, So something, I'm not saying that all people are hostile. I'm just saying that in a condition like that, how do we make ourselves heard and valued? And I think a lot of that is how we approach and understand where they're coming from. So I'll give you an example. If you're trying to suggest that people need training on interpersonal skills, right? And you're taking, we'll use the engineers again. You're taking them off of their scrum, their sprint, and that's maybe 3 weeks, and saying we need to take people offline to do an training on emotional intelligence. Or I'm gonna be like, that is not at all related to getting the sprint completed on time. We don't have time, that's not in our budget, et cetera, et cetera. They come up with all these reasons why they can't do that because that's not their priority, right? But helping them to understand how that can actually help them be more efficient, have their team interact better with each other to get work done more quickly. Those are the kinds of things that will attract their attention and make them realize that, actually, I am having conflict on my team. If people would communicate better, and if they did take a moment to check in on how they're feeling that day, that it might help them, it would make things more efficient. So we're using some of those words, right?
Mm. Some of that same lingo to help with the translation.
Yes,
Like we want the
exactly.
same, right? We're both looking at this problem and we're wanting this like to find a solution,
Hmm.
um, and just have you try a different route.
Yeah, and using their language, and that's actually one of the points in the book, and the book helps to understand what their language is by getting
Mm.
them to say it. And all of chapter 2 is interviews with technical people and hearing what their language is. So when a consultant goes in, they can actually be speaking their language and helping to make that connection. Why the work that we do actually can help them solve their problems.
Right. And something else I had seen in the book, you had mentioned how this work, especially within the technical world, within STEM world, has really led to saving lives. And when I initially read that, I thought, okay, science, sure. But when you had really laid out how technology has impacted us, I had to really sit back with myself and say, you're right. Even in us having this kind of platform and podcast, uh, over something like the pandemic, we were still able to do our work efficiently and in a safer way. And I think just even within my reading it, I was like, you know what, she's right. There are so many facets that STEM touch upon that we as consultants could be more versed in.
Yeah, and appreciative of, right, and also feel good to be a part of, right, and helping them solve those kinds of problems to bring solutions to help everyone in the world have a better place.
Well, and let me know if I'm reaching with this
Mhm.
next part, because I've just, as we're talking, my juices are flowing and I'm thinking about it. But uh, something you talked early on about in the book is your place in STEM in your general interest, but also that the narrative you might have experienced as being a woman
Mm.
in STEM. And I know for me personally, my mom is in STEM, and so to watch some of the things that she had to fight for her place in is like finding her own voice. And so, how has your own journey impacted your wanting to put into this book?
Well, that's a great question. Um, well, I have found a way that I can contribute to STEM in a way that works for me as a psychologist and consulting in this way, as opposed to working in organizations as an engineer. And let's see, my journey did help me understand what some people are feeling. I think in an environment where there are still very few women, right? And um, part of the book talks about some of the statistics of diversity in STEM, and not just about women, but racial, LGBTQ, and other kinds of diversity. And looking at, in some ways, how we have made progress and having more diverse environments there, but yet in some ways we have not. And actually, the male female ratios are sadly the ones that have not changed as much as you might think, especially in certain types of areas like engineering. Software is a little bit more, but hardware, also in some of the science, not as much. There's certain ones that have, but not others. And so you're asking about how my experience has helped. Well, I guess having experienced the isolation and frustrations of being in a field that wasn't as supportive as I thought it could be, and inclusive, and understanding more about what inclusion means now and how that can help, I think is huge. And so I do a bit of work in that area now. And well, first of all, I support women leaders, especially in science. I have many programs that I do. And I even reached out with this book um, to support girls in STEM, because the reaction of the leaders that I interviewed was, we need to start early, early, early to get more girls interested and supported in STEM fields to then become employees, individual contributors to then become leaders. Because there aren't enough who are sticking it out. Um, and Also just helping with the people I work with now, understanding how to better support diversity, inclusion in work, and collaborate with others in that space to help them um, support their efforts. And again, that's also supporting those efforts and helping people in STEM understand how that can help them, how that can make their work product better, and their work environments better for people, et cetera, et cetera. But like helping, like you said, translate our language of inclusion, diversity, equity, things like that into their language, is something that I actually find extremely important, and I've touched on in the book in several, in fact, every chapter on the applied part.
That's so wonderful, and I'm so glad to hear that that is a benefit that's come out since you were able to publish this book and get it out to our population. Um, have there been any outcomes that you didn't foresee coming out from writing this book?
Yeah, I wrote the book well, in part just to um, as a you know a personal experience to write it and to get the word out, which I think is important for people to do, and also help like organize my thoughts and work. And that was certainly it was very helpful in that way, and also to check on the literature to make sure I was really well supported and validated by all that. And I was hoping to get consulting as a result, because that's really, I think, the biggest benefit of publishing is to have clients see the importance of the work and hire you. So that, yes, I've gotten some of that too, which is sort of expected. Okay. That wasn't the answer to your question. You asked what was unexpected. Okay. I guess a couple things were unexpected, and one of them may have should have been expected, which was opportunities to write more. You know,
Hey,
like, oh, you write, great. Would you be interested in this or that, and present. So I've actually got another opportunity I'm working on now for other writing. But something else happened just recently, which was very unexpected. And I really think the book had a lot to do with it, and that was being elected as a fellow of the APA, the American Psychological Association, for Division 13 for SCP. So I'm very proud of that, and started to acknowledge how writing a book like this has more than national impact, but perhaps even international impact, and that can help our whole field.
you heard it here, folks. This is where it started. When it starts to get out, when we talked about STEM and technicality and the intersection between the consulting world and our STEM world, that it started here. So that's really exciting. Um, and this another part that I might have read, and please confirm because I don't want to make sure I read it correctly. But are you also a martial arts?
Oh my gosh.
Did I, did
Yes,
I read?
actually, it's funny you should ask that because that actually came up just yesterday. Um, in my family. So I have a black belt in Shaolin Kempo,
Okay.
which is actually a Chinese version of martial arts, and I actually tested at the Shaolin Temple in China for my black belt, and that's another achievement that I'm very proud of. It's a different domain, yet it's kind of interesting how you need to be able to be tough and resilient, and so many areas actually cross over into the work that we do.
Wow. That could be its own podcast in itself. Is like, what I'm really picking up from you, Joni, is that you're really into translatable skills and that you have a really strong knack for the overlap in these different domains. Um, and you're kind of this gateway person, is in between for sure. So that's really exciting.
Well,
And
thanks.
as far as, yeah, well, look at that. I thought I had read that. I was like, really, a martial art as well? Is there anything she can't
Oh
do?
boy, plenty. Let's not focus on those areas right now.
Yeah, yeah. This is promotion. This is promotion. Okay, so I think we're almost at time, but I think the people would love to know what you got going on next.
Mhm.
What's next for Dr. Connell?
Well, I do have another book in the works. It's a little too early to talk about it, but I will say that a lot of the work that's new and different than what was in the book that's published is focusing on newer technologies, right?
Mm,
And that was in the last chapter. Is like, what is the future? In terms of technology and consulting, and both in terms of our clients, and as consultants, what will we be doing? And in the last year, I mean, the book is not that old, right? I mean, the book came out recently from this podcast, and one of the things that's been in the news daily is artificial intelligence. So I've got some work going on in that area, and helping consultants as well as clients with AI, and discovering that, and looking at how to use that effectively, ethically, and also in a way that's um, that's helpful, healthy, not harmful, psychologically, especially to humans.
That is amazing. Well, thank you, Joni. We're definitely excited to see what comes of that book. Let us know when it comes out. For those who are tuning in, we appreciate your time. Please, when you get a chance, go seek out this book, Consulting to Technical Leaders, Teams, and Organizations, Building Leadership in STEM Environments. Uh, well, thank you, Dr. Kong, for your time.
And thank you, Daniel.
Excellent. All right. We'll see you all next time.